Hello, good morning, everyone. Buongiorno or buonasera, depending on where you are in the world. And I am so excited to be doing this first on-site interview in the Taliesin West. So this is my second home away from Italy. My family lives in Scottsdale, so only a few miles from here. And we are here live thanks to Jeff Goodman. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming in so early to meet with us.
Well, it's good to be with you, and it's good to see everyone joining from around the world, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
really, truly from around the world. I think some Australians are going to be watching later on because it's way too early for them tomorrow. But Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about what you do here?
Sure. So I am, my name's Jeff Goodman. I'm the Vice President of Communication and Partnerships at the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. The Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation was actually founded by Frank Lloyd Wright himself. So if you hear about Frank Lloyd Wright organizations out there, we're the one that Wright started himself in 1940. We're kind of the legacy organization of his career. So we're here at Taliesin West, which was his winter home and studio here in the desert. We own Taliesin West and Taliesin in Spring Green, Wisconsin. His two homes, along with his intellectual property, all of his drawings, his writings, his likeness, his signature. So we also have a licensing program here. So if you see a Frank Lloyd Wright stained glass pattern or a tie or whatever, those are all licensed through the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. We are a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to inspire people to discover and embrace an architecture for better living through meaningful connections to nature, the arts, and each other. And I think this room that we're in here at Taliesin West, the garden room, which was the Wrights' living room here, is a great example of how it's an architecture for better living. So it's more than just buildings, right? It's just a way of life. And when you sit in here and you unfortunately the sun is kind of washed out the windows there, but you have these views of the landscape. No matter where you are, you feel deeply connected to the land. You're surrounded by incredible art and beauty, through his art collection, but also just, the art of the room itself. And then you see these open spaces where instead of cutting you off in a home from the people you love, you have these open spaces where you remain connected. And so through these connections, we believe that, embracing Wright's principles for living, you're not only a happier person, but, science has shown it makes you a healthier person as well.
I love how he's actually able to control what we see out from these low windows. They're low and horizontal.
Yeah, and not only, do you see out, but it kind of, he's the master of getting you to use the room the way he intends. So you don't actually get the full benefit of the room, which is a living room where you're supposed to be sitting, until you actually sit down in the furniture, and then the landscape's revealed to you. So he's really helps move you through these spaces to get the biggest benefit.
Yes. How did COVID affect you, and what is the foundation doing today?
Thank you for asking. I would say we're very lucky in a lot of ways, but that's not to say that the past year plus wasn't incredibly challenging for us. We here in Arizona, back in March of last year, we had to shut down our facilities during March. And you mentioned earlier when we were talking that Taliesin West, along with 7 other Frank Lloyd Wright sites, were inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage List. And one of the great benefits from being inscribed on that list is you should expect an immediate increase in your visitation, which translates to immediate increase in your revenue, which is desperately needed in order to fulfill our mission and keep these buildings in great shape.
Yes.
And so, we were just starting to see that benefit, and then we closed and we lost all momentum from that, really monumental honor. But we didn't want to cut people off from our sites and from Frank Lloyd Wright's work. So we pivoted really quickly to doing, what you're doing here in reaching out, using the technology available to us to find live interactive experiences to continue to inspire people through this work. So, and I think we all learned a lot in this last year about how to engage people who aren't in the space with you. And even though, knock on origami chair wood, hopefully the pandemic will be coming to an end in the near future, hopefully. We'll continue to try to engage the world using these new ways of communicating. And so since part of our mission is to really engage the world in this way, I hope you don't mind if I mention that we do have a membership program here at the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, and that comes with not only experiences to visit Taliesin and Taliesin West in person and have exclusive member benefits, but we get a 10% discount in the Frank Lloyd Wright store, reciprocal benefits at Frank Lloyd Wright sites across the country where you can go and visit for free. And we talked about earlier, and you got to see some of them. We publish 4 times a year the Frank Lloyd Wright Quarterly magazine, which is amazing, which is my baby. And and you're going to see, did you add those to the slides?
Yes, I did.
So you're going to see in the presentation later, one issue every year we dedicate to exploring the unbuilt works of Frank Lloyd Wright, because if you can sit here at Taliesin West, like we were talking about before, and learn all of these things about a better way to live through the experience of them, think about all of the Frank Lloyd Wright projects that were never built and what we could learn from those. So we explore those, and we partner with a Spanish architect named David Romero, who you're going to see his work later. He creates these photos of unbuilt works, and you think you're looking at a contemporary photograph, but it's actually just an architectural rendering to help us explore deeper. So if you are interested in becoming a member, your membership does go to support our mission here and to support the preservation of these UNESCO World Heritage Sites. You can learn more about that at our website at franklloydwright.org. But honestly, I'm just really happy to have you here. I hope as the sun continues to rise, you'll get a better view of this amazing room behind you. But really hope you can visit in person too. And just very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Jeff. It was really an honor to meet you. And what I will do is I will include all the links for the membership in the recording with this. So Fantastic. People will be able to click in and see more. And I do hope everyone will come next time, come here in this beautiful living room in person. Not just virtual, yes. But in person.
Yeah, we'd love to have you here. So so please do visit. But I think I'm not the person that everybody came to see.
You're our special bonus guest.
Exactly.
You're the host, really. But yes, we have another guest, and this is so exciting for me because usually I do these from my living room in Italy or here in Scottsdale, and now we're in this majestic setting, and I actually get to see my guests live, which is a whole new life. It's really a gift. So thank you, Jeff.
It's kind of symbolic of the reopening of the world too. You get to see people face to face now.
Yeah.
So
very true. May this be the way we meet in the future.
Exactly. All right. Well, nice to see everyone, and look forward to seeing you here at Taliesin West or virtually through our digital engagement as well.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Jeff.
So here is our Signore, the man of the hour. Hi, this is Lloyd Natof. Lloyd, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
You bet.
You made me kind of go out of my comfort zone, reach out from the Renaissance, expand my horizons to talk about Frank Lloyd Wright's work. But what was really amazing for me is to come back to Florence and how everything kind of ties back to Florence and the Renaissance.
I was surprised by how much Italian Florence material relating to Wright there was. I was unaware of some of those elements.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Lloyd Natof. I design and build furniture in Oak Park, Illinois, which is a suburb right next to Chicago, Illinois. It's also where Wright had his first home and studio and raised his first family. I also teach at the School of Architecture, which has gone through several name changes. It used to be the longest one that it was named was the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture. That was kind of a natural outgrowth of the apprentices that he had when he had an active practice. And right now I'm in Phoenix because I'm teaching at the school. And then you guys invited me to do this interview.
Yes, yes. How do you feel when you come to one of the buildings designed by your great grandfather?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a great combination of sort of intellectual satisfaction because there's a lot to see and kind of consider and think about. And I kind of have a data bank of questions that I'm always trying to find answers to about how Wright resolves certain issues. But then kind of there's a profound psychological quality to being in his buildings. And each building has a slightly different flavor, but they're all like just deeply satisfying on both levels.
And what do you think made him come to Arizona? I mean, even driving here today, it is still secluded and kind of hidden behind the desert landscape and saguaros. And I can just imagine how it was in 1930s. It was really kind of the end of the world.
Yeah, there was a dirt road, and it was several miles to a small downtown. I'm a little unsure of the exact year. It was in the early to mid 1930s that Wright was given a commission to do a development, a residential development. I believe it was called San Marcos in the Hills. And that was, I think, in Chandler. I'm sorry, I'm not like super good on all the historical aspects of Wright's work. And so they were, at that point, he only had his home in Wisconsin. And so at some point, it was probably in the winter, he asked the client if they could come to the site, which was a very rural area of the desert, and set up a camp and do the drawing work there. And that became the beginning of this camp he called Ocotillo. And it's a camp that he talks at some length about in his autobiography. It really captured his imagination and started a new style of architecture. He's exploring something that we're going to talk about a little bit later, desert masonry. And there's been some really good research about what Ocotillo looked like, and there's been some models made, things like that. But it was literally a desert camp. There was a wall. There were these tents that were partially frame structures with tent coverings. And I think it's also important to recognize at that point he's in his 60s.
Wow! And camping out in the desert.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, a very adventuresome person, but I think he's surrounded by a very youthful cohort. This is the beginning of the fellowship, that kind of formal program of people coming and staying and living and working with him, working both in the studio and kind of in the Taliesin community. When both estates are established, they're relatively self-sufficient in the sense that they do their own cooking, they're living together, things like that.
They're self-sufficient, really.
Yeah.
And I guess, he had this empty canvas to really create whatever he wanted. And this is, I think, what the result is where we are today, right?
Yeah.
Do you have anything of your great-grandfather? Do you have a memento or what kind of object?
I do. I have a dozen or so Japanese woodblock prints.
Okay.
Wright's first kind of trip out of the United States was to Japan. And whereas like most American architects would do kind of a grand tour of Europe, he didn't arrive in Europe until a decade or so after that. And when he was in Japan, he collected these Japanese woodblock prints, which were kind of occupying a curious territory between kind of comic strips or kind of a sort of disposable graphic element. And something with significant artistic merit. And he was very captivated by them compositionally. And it actually later on, after that first trip, dealing in these woodblock prints became an important source of income for him. Okay. Especially, I think, I'm just guessing on the years, but I think it's approaching the Great Depression. And so I have a handful of these things. And, but I think really the most significant thing that I got from him is just because of my relationship to him, I've been able to be around both Taliesins and visiting them for family events. And it's a kind of casual intimacy with really kind of profound works that has been really useful just in terms of like studying them as well as kind of having the experience of being in them.
And you're such an amazing designer, woodworker, and really furniture designer. Do you think that is something you got from him? Or at least a little part of it was?
I mean, I think that I have kind of inclinations or preferences as I was starting to figure out how to design and what I like. Sometimes I would notice very small similarities. You know, I was kind of captivated by the eye, by the idea of taking a piece of plywood and mitering it and kind of creating a fold, and this idea of something going around the corner. And you see that in his buildings with walls that are kind of L-shaped in a plan view that kind of folding around. And so it's these really small elements where I felt like just a kind of a similar, maybe it's a kind of temperament, yeah. But beyond that, I'm not really sure, you know. And he was not a woodworker. He seemed to have some facility and understanding of tools. Workers with people, there's some stories of workers talking about him sort of showing students how to use a saw or something like that. So I think he definitely had awareness and knowledge of tools and how to use them, but he wasn't building the furniture. Yeah.
But that's an aesthetic kind of transferred, you know, through the bloodline.
I think so. And I mean, I think I've been more influenced by the context that being a descendant of Frank Lloyd Wright creates, and this notion of that there's a possibility that a creative field, it could be something that I could go into.
And you have some amazing things to share with us today. So let's go into the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And I think it's going to be really interesting to be looking at these images with your eye as we go through them. Right. So let's see. Right in the middle.
So this is one of a series of PowerPoints that I kind of loosely call Reading Wright. And they came out of an attempt to, when I started to teach at the architecture school, I was initially really just brought in to help some students build some very kind of practical things, to give them just very basic hands-on experience in designing little rolling tables for a model shop.
Sorry, let me just start from the beginning.
Okay.
See if I can move this a bit.
Doing technical things.
Yes, just from far away. Okay, here we go. Perfect. Perfect.
And so the and so when I started to teach and we were kind of designing and building these simple model carts, I felt a real kind of strong pressure to make this an exercise in learning about design. In other words, not just kind of four legs and a top on casters or something like that. And so I really started to kind of push to figure out what is it that can be learned from looking at Wright's work that is relevant for a contemporary designer. I mean, I think there's a lot of historical information that is useful and kind of people explore, but like if you're in particular a graduate student of architecture, and perhaps maybe you're not really necessarily into Wright, is there something you can learn from Wright that would be useful for you professionally and in your development as a designer? And so this is one particular thing that I've developed over the years. And loosely, the collection is really about a way to approach design that can be inferred from looking at Wright's work. This particular presentation I put together for the National Stone Building Conference. And they asked me to talk about Wright's masonry work. And so it became sort of an exercise to kind of figure out if there's something about Wright's masonry work that could shed some light on his design process. This particular photo is of Taliesin in Spring Green, Wisconsin. This is the courtyard of the house, which is called Taliesin. Taliesin also refers to the whole estate, which is a collection of several buildings over, I don't know, 400 acres or something like that. But let's start chronologically with what's called Hillside, which is about a mile away from that house. Hillside was originally designed for his sisters as a school, a very progressive school that they had started. And this is from 1903, and the masonry here is kind of characterized by a kind of craggy, naturalistic face, but the vertical corners of the masonry masses are dressed and have a very kind of crisp, defined line. It's interesting that there's such a wide range of stones sizes in there. We can see that there's a square stone, there's some really narrow horizontal stones, and there is clearly defined horizontal mortar lines, but they're irregular, and the sense of spacing between them varies. Here's another masonry mass kind of around the corner by the theater there. Similar quality with the dressed corners. And I think it's important to kind of point out that the masonry masses themselves are horizontal rectangles in totality, but then we have these kind of defined vertical lines from the corners. And also in the walls, if you look closely, you're going to see these curious moments sometimes where there's like 3 tiny stones. And in this particular instance, there's a pulled out stone. This is the back side of the theater. And I think the important characteristic of this very early masonry work is this wide variety of stones, relatively, they're for the most part horizontal rectangles, and we have the horizontal mortar lines. But then within that system, there's really, really tiny stones, sometimes these groupings of 3 and stuff like that. And even on the back side of the theater, there is some really interesting stones. This particular stone is L-shaped in elevation, but it's also L-shaped in plan view from like a top view. This is another one. What I'm referring to is that as in the jog in the wall, what looks like it might be 2 stones is really 1 stone that's been carved into an L shape, and then you can sort of see that dressed corner on it. And that's actually really labor intensive. And it's not in a very prominent area. It's kind of on the back side of the theater. And what I get from all this is that Wright is kind of putting in place a sort of a loose system that he's communicated to the stonemasons, and that they kind of get it, and they're kind of being playful, I think. Maybe they're kind of demonstrating their skill to other tradespeople. Maybe they're doing it for themselves. Maybe they're doing it for Wright. You really don't know. But these are unusual elements. So a couple decades later, Wright builds Taliesin up on the hill. It's characterized by a smaller variation in terms of the stone sizes, but then we have this kind of regular texture with stones that are kind of pulled out. And this pulling out kind of creates a distinctive effect on the corners. So we don't have the vertical line of a dressed corner. Now there's a kind of diagonal quality by pulling the stones out on the corners. And to my eye, this kind of is very similar to the diagonal quality that we see in Unity Temple with these, there's 4 masonry masses, one at each corner. We're looking at one of them. and they have this applied wooden molding, and there's a compositional effect of a kind of folded plane, the two yellow planes that fold around the corner of the pier there. But if you look at the wooden applied molding that goes around the corner of that pier, it creates a similar kind of diagonal effect when you're standing in the middle of this room and you see that coming at you from all four corners. And so I think this is sort of the effect created when you pull out the stones on the corner. A couple decades later at Falling Water, there's a similar effect of pulling the stones out from the masonry mass. And the stones in this case, though, are very narrow. And actually, if you look closely, sort of in the center, a little bit to the right, you can see a grouping of 3 or 4 tiny stones, like that little excerpt I had in the wall. And this kind of narrow, pulled out horizontal lines is reflected on the interior furnishings of Falling Water. These hassocks or ottomans. You can see the 3/4-inch rounded edge kind of sticking out, sandwiched between 2 foam kind of upholstered elements. 1937, Wright starts to build here at Taliesin West, and now the ratio between the cementitious material, the mortar, and the stone has shifted a little bit. Instead of the cement or mortar being between the blocks and kind of receding, now it's become larger and it's become much more irregular. This is what Wright called desert masonry. We still have very clearly defined masonry masses. Instead of having kind of horizontal mortar lines, we have these V-shaped incisions that they kind of knit the campus together wherever there's some masonry masses down on the other side of this pergola, and the horizontal lines carry through to those. The stones obviously are now arranged very irregularly inside there. We don't really have a mortar line. These are kind of stones that are cast in place. The V-shaped incisions are functionally, they're actual pour lines. So they would kind of build up to one of those with the formwork and cast that lower level and then go to the next one. And so they serve a practical purpose of kind of concealing the pour lines. So each kind of strata would be done at different time periods.
And I love the different shape and colors of stones that they're using.
Yes, it's a great canvas for that. And this kind of system of desert masonry, oops, went the wrong direction. This system of desert masonry can be used to kind of create these extraordinary shapes. And if you look at the tall vertical element on the top right, you can see some really large stones there. And it kind of boggles my mind to consider how that was done, because basically, if you imagine there's a concrete or there's a plywood form around everything, so they have to work inside the form and lower these very heavy stones into place. And the stones are kind of pushed up against the face of the form on the inside, and they're held in place with wires or blocking that's wedging them in place, and they would kind of pack newspaper around the edges of them so the cement would not work its way around to the face of it. We also worked with really what we would call now dry pack concrete. In other words, it's not a liquid mixture that we're used to seeing now, and so that would help prevent the concrete from coming around to the faces. And you can still see little elements of newspaper and wire if you look closely around the desert masonry here.
I love this, almost compared to Renaissance palazzi in Florence. They're 15th or 16th century, and you kind of think, how did they put these huge blocks at the facing of the facades?
Yeah.
How did they lift them up? So
yeah, that's
the labor
interesting.
intense. It's really kind of to imagine how much time it took and how many people were involved to do this.
Right. There's not many examples of, like, let's say 20th century building technologies where we actually kind of scratch our head and figure out how was this done, because in this instance they didn't have much in the way of heavy machinery. It's possible to think of this system as just a way to kind of save money. In other words, how can how can he create these large masonry masses and not have to spend a lot of money on concrete?
Yeah.
Well, you can fill it with aggregate, except in this instance, he realizes the aggregate could be stones that they find in the desert, and they can be this important kind of decorative element as well as a compositional element. And here's a couple walls that are kind of adjacent to the room we're in right now, and we can actually kind of zoom in and see the really wide range of stones, and not just in terms of sizes, but also in terms of colors as well as in shapes. We have the rounded stones and then the more kind of typical craggy stones. And then the system also allows you to kind of have some of the stones that break the surface of the masonry mass, or even kind of break the V groove. And this is actually a really important element of this compositionally. This is an example of a Wright designed house that was built by the client. And these are individually very beautiful stones, but they're all about the same size and they're all about the same color palette. And they're placed in a relatively regular pattern. You can almost sort of see the cement between the stones is about the same thickness of line as it goes around. And this sort of falls flat a little bit. It doesn't have that dynamic quality. So the desert masonry requires a wide variety of individual elements. And if you try to kind of unify the stones, then you lose a lot of its animating energy. This is kind of a really important element in Wright's designs, this element of a kind of coherent whole and then a very active interplay between smaller elements. And this famous photo of Wright's fingers interlaced like this, I think really manifests that in the sense that we see the whole. In other words, we see the form that his two hands make when they're put together like that, but the individual elements, his fingers, are not lost, they're not subsumed into the form. They have their own identity. And it's not hard to kind of look at this desert masonry and see a kind of analog for societies or communities. So maybe like a community, a highly regulated community where the individual elements are, where it's desired that they have a kind of a fair amount of uniformity, might be the military, where you don't want individual expressivity. It's problematic. And then maybe the other end could be a kind of cartoon portrayal of a kind of a hippie commune, where you have a high degree of individual expression, but what suffers is a kind of the ability of the group to function as a coherent organization, to do maybe monolithic tasks or something like that. And usually kind of this relationship between the individual whole is portrayed as being a kind of a seesaw. You have one or the other, and that these two elements are kind of in opposition to each other. But in Wright's kind of view, and what I see in his work, is that these two things, it's possible to generate systems or design systems that value individual expressivity and require it, and still at the same time have coherent, clear forms and strong singular expressions.
Incredible. The poetry is just incredible.
Yeah, so these two elements don't have to be in opposition.
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed as I was starting to prepare this presentation for the National Stone Building Association was that there was this curious similarity between natural stone and furniture. And that was that they both had to be built from parts. In other words, you can't really cast a chair out of a single piece of wood. Sure, you could carve it out of a single log, but that's about all you can do. And the same thing with, if you need a masonry wall out of natural stone, you can't find a single stone. And what that means is, especially in Wright's hands, is that because you're forced to work with small pieces or parts, then you can use a compositional approach to design. So you worry a little bit less about the overall form, and you start to kind of explore the possibility of the relationships between the parts. And so I mean, this is just one of many examples, but if you look at these Wright chairs, we have this kind of applied molding that you see around that lower rail between the two front legs. And that applied molding is doing something. It's kind of underneath the rail, and then it kind of wraps around the legs. And so it has this effect of kind of holding the legs together, holding the legs to the rail. And so in Wright's hands, individual parts aren't really something that you kind of have to kind of bring together and smooth. You put them in motion by doing things. I call that a compositional effect. And the other thing that I kind of talked about was sort of how, when I first started design, I actually looked a lot at masonry work just for decorative elements like the image on the left, and also just kind of tectonic massing of shapes. This approach to valuing individual parts and using them to create compositional effects is actually not a common thing in the design world we live in. We live in a world that is much more shape-based, where there's a real emphasis on creating a very interesting shape and then organizing the parts in a way that maximizes the shape. So in this chair, there's obviously lots of pieces of wood that make it, but they're all in line with each other. He doesn't want them to have sort of individual expressivity. He wants them to kind of create the form of the chair. This is another example of chair where, well, gosh, we have lots of parts, but they're very separated from each other. And this will be the other end of the continuum, where the pieces have a fair amount of individual expressivity, but the relationships to each other are all the same. They're all relationships of adjacency. And so in Wright's hands, the continuum will be expressed. We'll have parts that are highly integrated with their neighbors, and we'll have parts that are differentiated or have a kind of relationship of adjacency with their neighbors. And he's doing that all to kind of create these various compositional effects. This is a very nice chair. It has many virtues, but it's not like compositionally based the way Wright would. And these are sort of examples of sort of conventional ways to work with natural stone, where you find a beautiful piece of stone, you make it as big as possible, or you group the seams in a way to kind of let you see the overall effect of a large piece of stone. Or in this sort of thing, sure, we have lots of stones, but they're all in the same plane with each other. There's very little variation in shape and only a little variation in size, and it's clear that this is all the arrangement of the stones is mostly about trying to create the shape. And yeah, so in conclusion, I mean, this kind of compositional approach to design, it can yield these really remarkable structures, and it creates a lot of variation. It really adds a very special element to it. So if you're not obsessed about creating the shape, and you're aware that you can do these individual expressive maneuvers, you can get these types of things going.
And I love the difference between the two Taliesin's.
Yes, yeah.
The way they're, I mean, just absolutely incredible the way they fit in their environment so greatly.
Yeah, so just so people know, on the left, that's Taliesin in Spring Green, Wisconsin, and on the right is Taliesin West, where we're at right now. And both working with natural stones and some sort of cementitious material, and both highly expressive and at the same time containing like really clear singular masonry masses.
You know what I wanted to ask you is, could you show us a little bit of your own work?
I do, yeah. I
know that I think everyone wants to see what, how all of these reflections on the work of your great grandfather then play into your own work.
Yeah, so I picked some pieces that particularly are about parts. This is sort of my first exploration into kind of parts, where I started thinking about this idea of just cutting wood into smaller blocks. So kind of, and it was really just an experiment, and like, so how to shape the blocks, how to put them together. I was really trying to address these practical considerations. And then that led to this piece here. And what I discovered was that if you start to cut the wood into smaller parts and you put it together, you're going to have a lot of seams. And in woodworking, seams are a signifier. In other words, the tighter and crisper a seam is, the more significant, the more it's perceived as being high craftsmanship. Okay, and I'm a little bit of an iconoclast, and so I sort of resisted that singular notion of a kind of a signifier of specialness or craftsmanship. And so as soon as I realized that we're going to have lots of seams, I realized that that would also kind of take away the preciousness of a seam. And I started to explore ways to kind of separate the blocks. So here I'm putting kind of V grooves between the blocks. And it was very satisfying because I realized that it could still read as fine craftsmanship. And yet I didn't have to kind of toe the line on this kind of super crisp, tight seams. There was another avenue of expressiveness. This piece is, this is a really big piece, and it's a very similar thing with the blocks kind of going up the sides.
What is the wood?
These are all white ash, which is an American species of tree. It's actually a tree that is being attacked pretty aggressively by an invasive beetle. It's a wood that has never been front and center as a commercial wood. It's been called sort of the poor man's oak. But I really like the fact that you can find irregular grain in it.
It almost looks like marble.
Yeah,
marble
yeah.
grains. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a burl in the center panels here. And so yeah, I did a kind of pierced carving at the top, and I kind of have the sides kind of recess in on a convex radius or concave radius.
How many hours of work? How many days of work?
Oh, this is probably 2 months, but it's not a full 2 months.
Okay.
And you know, at a certain point, as it's starting to come together, it's very inspirational. Like, you know, you're kind of turned on by everything, and it's so satisfying. Yeah.
Is it hard to part with them when the clients come to get them?
This is the oddest thing. I'm not really. I don't have no problem letting them go. It's a funny. I really kind of I go between like really cherishing them to it being sort of very transactional.
That's good.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would have a house full of beautiful furniture.
Right, exactly. That really doesn't serve me. So one of the classes I teach at the school is this kind of analysis, design, build course. And basically, we kind of look at Wright's compositional designs in 2 dimensions, which are in particular his art glass patterns. And the students study compositional effects through that, and then we start to kind of try to figure out ways to extrapolate those ideas into 3 dimensions. And so these pieces are table-like in the sense that they preference a horizontal surface, but they're really primarily compositional studies. And I purposely kind of keep the palette really narrow. So we're not, everything usually has to be kind of right angles and parallel, so no diagonals, no circular elements. And then also it's just Douglas fir plywood with Douglas fir solids. And so there's this piece, and these are all about the size of a kind of, let's say, a medium-sized end table. And I urge the students to work with planar elements, stick elements, and then kind of volumetric elements.
But there's such a Wright signature on them.
Especially this one, yeah. This I thought was a really brilliant manifestation of this kind of format of table that Wright did a lot of, where you have obviously a planar top, but then the legs are kind of fins. And the fins interact in some way with the shelf below, and then it usually interact in some way with the tabletop. And this student's design, they kind of stick out from 2 edges of the tabletop. And I really love the interplay between these 2 grid systems. So there's sort of a grid system at the top, which is a rectangle going in one direction, and then a grid system that's more strongly expressed in the shelf that's at kind of 45 degrees to that. And then those two grid systems kind of overlapping create some of the triangular elements. And this is a really important part in Wright's work, is that triangles aren't really placed. They're usually a consequence of two systems interacting. If just to kind of state it again, if you take two grids and you superimpose them one over the other, and then you rotate one 45 degrees, the intersections will create triangles. And so that's what's present here. And I think this is a really important part of Wright's approach to design.
Wow.
Every now and then a student will talk me into right angles and diagonals. And this is actually this shape, or this compositional study, came out of this system where you take two grid systems and you rotate them and you intersect them and you see what happens. So some of these elements are all in right angles to one grid, but at diagonals to the other grid.
Incredible.
Yeah, this is really remarkable. Really kind of leaps off the screen or off the floor, wherever it's placed. And some students explore this in a more kind of abstract way. So if there's a table in here, it's not super strongly expressed. And this is like really kind of a pure compositional study. And then some of them are much more regulated. And this is really just, actually, is it 6 planes that are interacting it seems in a very regular way, but actually as you walk around the piece, each side is very different. And this was a very interesting piece as we worked on it, because every day, if we finished working on it on the bench, he would pick it up and take it back to where he could store it. And he was always hitting the opposite side of it against something, because we could never really predict what was happening on the other side. Yeah, it's a very disorienting, even though it seems very regulated. And then I just thought I'd conclude with this super beautiful photo of Taliesin West here, with the orchid tree blooming.
Yes, I think it's happening right now. I think
Yeah,
it's in
yeah,
bloom.
we can go take a look at it if you like.
Wow, truly fascinating. I'm sure I see some questions coming in. We will come back to them at the end.
Absolutely,
okay?
yeah.
I think because it's really, really interesting to I'm sure there's so many questions coming in from many of the architects who are with us live today. But I also have some slides coming in.
Yes.
I have to say I had to choose a slide as beautiful as Taliesin West. So if you want to go, or let me have this, and I will
Use the bottom.
Okay, the bottom one. So look at this. I hope they compare Taliesin
Yeah.
West and then Florence at night. And there is really this interesting connection of Frank Lloyd Wright to Italy. And I chose this image just because it's so beautiful. And we get to see Florence for a bit. But this is actually the view from Fiesole Michelangelo. And this is where Frank Lloyd Wright stayed for a few months when he came to Florence in 1909. He's 42 years old. He's already an established architect, but there is a scandal. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about this. Kind of what brings him to Europe in 1909?
Yeah, so in 1908, he leaves Oak Park, his practice, and his wife and his first family with 6 children. And he he has a relationship with the wife of a client of his. Her name is Mamah Cheney.
It's so bad on so many levels.
Yeah, yeah, and it was quite a scandal. He was relatively famous at this time, and obviously sort of attitudes about divorce were much different than they are now. And so I believe he had an invitation to come to Europe to do a monograph, a series of a book of some sort. And that's the Bosma portfolio. And so, you can tell that I've really focused on Wright's kind of compositional effects, and, and I'm much kind of squishier on the historical stuff and the chronologies. But
I think this portfolio is so interesting because it was the first one to be done of his, right? There was never nothing like this done before.
No, that's
right?
correct, right. And this is very interesting that you picked this
Yes,
particular
I
one,
picked this one.
because this is the house that he designed for Mamah Cheney.
Yes.
And it's actually an interesting house, an odd house. It's in Oak Park, and it's not in super great condition right now, but it's hidden behind a wall. And this is an unusual quality in Oak Park. Oak Park is a typical suburb of that era, in the sense that these are medium-sized lots, and the houses are to the front of the lot, not all the way to the front of the lot. There's a small front yard, but the preference is for a large backyard. In this instance, the house is pushed back. Maybe it's in the center of the lot, and it's hidden behind this wall. And in this kind of perspective, you can actually see the house. But if you were walking down the sidewalk, you cannot see the house. Maybe some roof stuff, and that's really about it.
So he basically comes to Florence. He has, I think his oldest son is with him, and also another young architect.
Yes.
That are helping him to do this. And here is the house where they stayed. And this is thanks to Filippo Ficci, a Florentine architect, who really dedicated, I think, his research to Frank Lloyd Wright's first stay in Italy in 1909, 1910. And he would have been here working on this portfolio. So they're very, very busy.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mamah is not even with them. She will join them later on.
Yeah.
So he does have this interesting, almost this romantic stay. I guess maybe the happiest times of his life, if you're to read his autobiography.
Yeah, he speaks glowingly of it.
Yes, and I think he speaks about this voluntary exile. I don't know how many people he would have met when he was in Florence. He's probably busy working on this incredible project.
It would have been a lot of work, because all the drawings are done from scratch, and they're done in a very unforgiving medium. They're ink. And so he is working from the extant drawings. I believe these are all buildings that were built. At the very least, he had full drawing sets for them. And so they're kind of tracing off those drawings, but they're also changing them. They're alterations, and they're also kind of making them more graphically intense in terms of kind of leaving out information and rearranging things. And it's a tremendous amount of work. I mean, it's not a surprise that he brings people with him. I mean, he was known as a very fast drafter, yeah, this was a remarkable amount of work.
And then he actually decides to move up to Fiesole, and this was the house where they stayed. This is where Mamie joins him. So there are descriptions in his autobiography of their lunches and their long walks. Fiesole is a charming town in the hills, and everyone would kind of come and stay there because you have this beautiful view of Florence right in front of your eyes. For example, Mark Twain, he would spend his time there in Florence as well, in Fiesole as well. So I think when he's here, I think he's trying to figure out what will be his next steps in his career. I think he talks to his mom and he says, okay, I want to buy a piece of land and I want to build my own house. So you kind of see his future life coming into place while he's in Italy. And I wonder, how much he was influenced by the architecture, by these beautiful villas fitting in so beautifully in their environment.
Yeah.
I think no one really talks about it. I think it's maybe just a guess. I don't know if you would.
It's a guess. Yeah. I mean, he's very critical of architecture, but he also has a soft spot for vernacular architecture.
Yes.
And he's responsive to it, but it's really unclear in what ways, because he's so opaque about talking about his design process. He tends to use metaphors and soaring language, and he talks about democracy a lot, and there's interesting things to say about there, but you're not going to learn much about a design process.
Yeah. So when he leaves Italy, I think it's in September of 1910, he goes back to the US, and his career really will take off. I think he didn't get really any commissions right away. I think it's the first important commission that comes after this. I think is a hotel in Japan.
It's the Imperial Hotel. Yeah. It's a really big one.
So he had to wait a little bit for his career to kind of come into place. And he speaks about this. He says, I have to go back to kind of continue my life where I cut it in such a dramatic way.
Yeah. Well, there is, his last Oak Park house is built in 1910. In other words, 2 years after he leaves Oak Park. And there were buildings on the drawing board still being built, in particular, the Roby House, which is a kind of seminal prairie style house, is not completed by the time when he's leaving. So I'm assuming he's getting some income from that. And this house that is built in 1910 in Oak Park, I'm assuming that commission came in at around 1908 or something like that.
So he does have.
There's odds and ends. And then, when he returns to the United States, he leaves this urban environment and he goes out to Spring Green, Wisconsin, which is incredibly rural at the time. But he has a connection there. This is where his mother's family is from, and they're farmers, they're ministers, they're kind of they're really it's a really dramatic family, that side of on his mother's side.
I love how all the great Florentines were sent into exile and they have to leave Florence to go somewhere else, like Dante, then writes his Divine Comedy out of Florence. But Frank Lloyd Wright actually comes to Florence to do this, to create this incredible portfolio, to be with the woman he loved. And they have this really short time together, like 4 or 5 years, right? Before she tragically.
A little bit longer, yeah. So I think they met before 1908, okay. But then they returned to the United States. He builds Taliesin in 1911, and then there's a fire, and she dies in the fire along with 2 of her children with her first husband. And this is an act of arson and murder. There was a servant who kind of set that all in motion. And so, yeah, they really have like 6 to 8 years together.
So I'm so grateful that they had this time in Fiesole.
Yeah,
it was like the honeymoon.
It's totally a honeymoon.
And then when Frank Lloyd Wright comes back to Italy, this is 1951. So how old is he?
1951. Well, he dies at 59, and I believe he was 91.
Okay.
So he's in his 80s.
Yes,
and he's traveling internationally.
Yes, he's traveling, and not only that, but he comes to Italy because he is cherished. By now, there is this network of young Italian architects who absolutely adore everything he does and everything he stands for. And this is a great photo from the Frank Lloyd Wright publication with Carlo Scarpa. And Carlo Scarpa is only 45 years old here. He's a bit of an outcast because he decided not to sit for an architecture exam at the end of his studies, kind of in the post-war Italy. So,
and was that a statement?
It was a statement. He said, okay, I'm not going to do this. So he's a brilliant architect, but he doesn't have a license actually to practice. So when Frank Lloyd Wright arrives to Italy, there's a committee in Venice to welcome him. And he just kind of dismisses all of them by saying, which one of you is Carlo Scarpa? So he insists that then this young architect goes with him. And I think behind the young man behind them is Angelo Messieri, who also was a young architect and who decides to commission Wright to do a palace on the Grand Canal, which was their family palace. So he has this dream of having this incredible, already global architect on a global scale, to design this for him. And this is Carlo Scarpa admiring the project that Frank Lloyd Wright did for this memorial, because unfortunately Angelo comes to the US to meet Frank Lloyd Wright. He travels around the country and then he is killed in a car accident. I think he was only 32 years old. So his widow then decides to say, okay, it's no longer going to be our family home, but let's make this into kind of a memorial and make it to be a place for the students to come. There was a library for them to also work in, because right next door on the Grand Canal is Ca' Foscari, the 15th century palace, which is a university of, University of Venice. So there's a kind of a great location on so many levels. So here is the design that he does for the memorial, which there's also one in color.
Yeah, I love this rendering. In particular, I love the way in the foreground on the right, the that masonry is kind of rendered. It's realistic and cartoonish at the same time, and I mean cartoonish in a like stylized, and then kind of back, and then there's the residence, the memorial in the background. I love the way the surface of the canal is rendered, with a kind of ghostly shadow of the building, and it's very atmospheric and also kind of very technical as well.
Then there's also a floor plan. It was supposed to be a triangular. It's a very particular piece of land, but this is prime real estate. You know, we are on the Grand Canal.
Yeah. So, for me, what's important is at the very bottom of the drawing, that's the canal. So the facade, which is really all we really know of the building, you know, most kind of images are from the facade. That's actually a very small part of the building. You know what I mean? There's on the diagonal, we have a long row of, I think those are bedrooms, and to the right, that's a mezzanine level that would be above the triangular plan. And yeah, so it's a really nice, so that facade is sort of like a small porthole, you know, through the whole building. But it has a very fantastic kind of modern effect that contains the details and the whimsy that like Wright's work has.
Yeah. And then this is the Grand Canal. This is that part of the canal where the Messeri Palace was. So the neighbors are extraordinary. Ca' Foscari, 1453 on one side, Palazzo Balbi, 1582 on the other. And thanks to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, thanks to Jeff Goodman, we actually get to see this incredible rendering of what the palazzo would look like. This is by David Romero, which I think is extraordinary. What do you think?
It's great to see this. These kind of creations really help to shed light on, you know, like most people looking at floor plans and stuff like that, that really doesn't do much for them. They don't have much to they don't have a frame of reference. And to actually sort of then generate the exterior is really helps for a lot of people to register. But also you can start to understand the relationship to adjacent buildings. I was surprised to see on the right side that there's that kind of airspace or gangway or alley there. It makes complete sense when you look at the floor plan because that provides windows for those bedrooms.
And the problem of light in the Grand Canal, the only light you really get is from the canal itself.
Yeah.
Because this narrow calle on the side doesn't really, they don't allow for any light. So there's a lot to consider, you know, when you work in Venice. And then this is the rendering at night, which is so magical.
Yeah.
And here's also another image I found online, just how it would look kind of on that strip
at a distance
on the Grand Canal.
Yeah, I think they overreacted when they rejected it.
Yeah.
It was really not that startling.
Yeah.
But maybe it's because we're looking at it with modern eyes.
Yes, and there's a beautiful, you know, even I think Frank Lloyd Wright, when he's designing this, he does actually explain that he wanted to kind of go and make this incredible Venetian tradition alive. And not only to speak about organic architecture or even national architecture, but something that fits in with its environment.
Yeah.
So he's aware that there will be polemics. And, you know, in 1970s, I think the rules kind of were loosened up a little bit. So there are some newer buildings on the canal.
Oh, yeah.
But at the time when this debate was happening, it was just too early, 1950s.
Yeah.
It was too early for this to happen. But it would have been a very different vision of the canal, that's for sure.
Yeah, it would have been a nice element.
And then I think, so what happens in 51? So he's not only in Venice, but he comes to Florence. And he comes for a very specific, delightful reason. It's actually a biggest exhibition dedicated to his work. It's a traveling exhibition that I think started in Florence. It's called 60 Years of Living Architecture. And it was in Palazzo Strozzi. So
and this is to the left of the memorial building, right?
This would have been in Florence.
Oh, this is, I'm sorry,
Florence.
I misunderstood.
So we left Venice for the Grand
Yes.
Canal.
Got it, thanks.
We're now in Florence, and so there's this exhibition dedicated to him. And I wanted to put in the image of today because right now there is an exhibition by J.R., French contemporary artist, called La Ferita, the Wound, and how the museums are closed to public, and we're all kind of wounded because of it. We can't go in to see them. So there's kind of this idea of looking in and you see different Renaissance works of art. So this is now this is on the facade itself. But I wanted to show this today because Palazzo Strozzi is such an incredible venue. And to have an exhibition there was, I think, a great way to honor Frank Lloyd Wright. So he has this incredible network of people who admire him, his architecture, but also democracy in all America stood for back then.
Yeah, so this is a kind of a way to kind of break from fascism.
Yes.
And at least for the architectural profession to do that, or kind of make a statement. And so is Scarpa seen as being a figurehead of that break from fascism?
I think he was one of the definitely part of that network.
I see.
And his ideas will then continue. Of course, it all starts with Frank Lloyd Wright, but then he goes to Japan too, right? And he dies in Japan.
Scarpa does.
Scarpa does, exactly. But apart from the exhibition in Florence, something else happens, which is the greatest honor is given to Frank Lloyd Wright by the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, Count Carlo Sforza. He gives him the Golden Florin, which is the biggest honor city of Florence can do. And I have seen few people receive them, in my own lifetime.
Yeah.
And it happens in Palazzo Vecchio. So there's an incredible image of packed Salone of the 500 in Palazzo Vecchio to attend this. So Italy welcomes him, I think, when he needed this escape and exile, then he comes back and he's recognized on so many levels there.
Yeah.
I think it's truly incredible.
Yeah, it is. This you've really kind of explored an aspect of his life I was really unaware of.
Yes. And then in 2010, there are other series of exhibitions that happen in his honor, honoring 100 years of his stay there. So truly incredible. And I wanted to end with this slide, forgive me, just because we have to put the Duomo in,
Sure.
Brunelleschi has to come up in this interview. So kind of this beautiful quote that says that if the building is great in its own time, it's going to be great forever. And I think Brunelleschi really stands for that.
Right. Yeah, he won't kind of name buildings specifically, but he'll kind of pull back and speak in general about this quality of that great buildings may exhibit, both in their time and in the future.
Yes. So I think we can stop the share of the screen. I think there is so much. I think there's some questions that were coming in. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure.
It was really an honor. And also to do this today, 9th of April, which marks 62 years of the death of Frank Lloyd Wright.
That's
I
right.
think makes it even more meaningful. Another important date, your birthday is coming up.
That's right.
So we have to honor the family in so many wonderful ways. So let's see what the comments were. Okay. Secluded doesn't surprise me at all. So Marissa is from Florence is writing about, I guess, the Taliesin West. I have been a huge fan of his work since a very young age, as I grew up not very far from the falling waters. And there really is in the middle of the woods in northern Pennsylvania. I have been there several times and absolutely in love with it.
Yeah. I mean, both Taliesin's Falling Water, there's a fair number of residencies did in very rural areas.
Yes.
And in many regards, it plays to his strengths in the sense that he was really good at interacting with nature. So he wasn't trying to camouflage his buildings where he's hiding them in nature, nor is he kind of placing a super modern grid in nature. He responds to nature really well, and he responds at an immediate level in terms of like working around individual rocks, and then also kind of abstraction of geometries from nature. And so the great thing about a secluded or isolated areas, you don't have other buildings by other people around you that you have to either respond to or kind of look at.
It's like a blank canvas.
It's a blank canvas.
And you can do your own fresco.
Yeah.
Liz is asking, what does the name Taliesin, what does it mean?
Well, I know Taliesin is a town in Wales. So the mother's side of his family, his mother's side of his family is Welsh, and they're, I think, the most significant influence on his life. And so Taliesin is the name of a town in Wales, but it's also the name of a bard, a poet, a Welsh poet. And it also, I believe, means shining brow, which I don't think they're referring to like a sweaty brow. I think it's referring to the light hitting the brow of a hill, something like that.
Let's see. Diana is saying one can see a similarity to Frank Lloyd Wright's in Scarpa's masonry treatment in the Fondazione Querini Stampaglia in Venice.
Yeah, I don't know that specifically, but I mean, Scarpa's attention to detail and his relation and his awareness of the power of manipulating the relationship between parts is that relationship to Wright is really evident for me.
Let's see, Arthur Peabody saying, so interesting, the Romero renderings of the memorial in Venice are just stunning.
Yeah, well, this was really this, you know, the renderings that came out of the Wright studio in the 30s, 40s, and 50s are just gorgeous. And he really had a team there that got his compositional approach and then also got his sort of technical approach to drawing and doing renderings. And some of them were quite big. And in those days, you know, to do like a 2-point or 3-point perspective, you had to kind of lay out these I forget what they're called, these points at some distance from the actual sheet of paper. So if the rendering itself is quite big, then these points have to be 8-10 feet apart. And so it must have been quite a production, you know, like maybe working on the floor or many desks put together to kind of lay these out. And then they're just gorgeous, you know, they really are.
My professor from University of Belgrade, Alexander Georgievich, is saying, oh, great lecture, thank you for invitation. So yes, I'm so glad that we have so many people coming in. And you know, when I started studying art history, I was a young student at University of Belgrade. And when we moved to Arizona, Frank Taliesin West was the only work I knew. And it became such an incredible tie to my new land.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would come every few months to visit here just because I thought, okay, there is something connecting me, you know, to maybe, well, I want to say the old world, Europe, but there was a meaning to this place. So it's important for me as well.
Yeah.
And then to find that his third wife was from Montenegro too, I thought, wow, these incredible connections.
Yeah, the Balkan connection.
And then, you know, connection to Florence as well. I mean, it's just a never ending. Let's see. Diana is asking, what is the dressed corner?
The dressed corner?
You know, on the stone buildings you talked about.
Oh, okay.
Dressing.
Yeah.
And what is that made out of?
Are you asking like what is it? And then in the sense that like, do you know what I was referring to, or?
No, I saw it, but what was it made out of?
So say that again.
What was it made out of? Was it concrete or was it?
Oh, okay. So the dress corner is actually part of the stone block, and those are, I believe, sandstone, but it's a relatively hard sandstone. Okay. So it's carved into the block.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Ellen is asking, do you know any inspiration or masonry connections or influences from the Etruscan wall in Fiesole on Wright's work? Oh, what a great question, Ellen. Ellen is from Arizona State University. She spends some time in Florence every summer with her students.
Oh, okay.
So this is a very particular question.
So well, I don't know what is it? Well, I may have seen it, but not known what it is.
Ellen, are you with us? You want to chime in?
Sure. The wall is not in great condition, but it's really fascinating and quite organic. So I have read snippets that there had been some influence in Wright's work, particularly in the time he was living in Fiesole, that, you know, again, like the organic connections of the wall, and also there are interesting drawings that are still visible on the wall itself. So, you know, in terms of what you were showing with a more kind of dynamic treatment of the masonry, I was wondering if you knew any connections.
Well, that's a great way to put it, kind of dynamic treatment of the masonry. Wright is, excuse me, Wright is so opaque about his influences. And if he does refer to them, they're usually something in the distant past, and he speaks generally of something rather something specific. So I'm not really aware of any. I think it's a very different kind of use of a really dynamic masonry wall, in the sense that, like, Wright is using that dynamism to create discrete compositional effects, like the three grouped stones, the effect of the pulled out stones on the corner, things like that, rather than a kind of textural effect. It has that quality, but it also has these additional elements.
Deborah is saying, this discussion has offered an incredible insight into Frank Lloyd Wright's approach to design. As a visual artist, I'm particularly inspired by the concept of the compositional approach to his structures. I have had the pleasure of seeing dozens of Lloyd Wright's buildings, and they never fail to impress the unique genius of this great architect.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yes. Liz is asking, does Wright borrow the idea of desert stonework? Does the idea of the stonework come from the Spanish or indigenous stonework?
It may. Definitely the shapes of the masonry masses here at Taliesin West, to my eye, look very similar to the shapes of, like, some of the Mayan buildings I've seen in Mexico. Especially in particular, this kind of idea, like a lot of those Mayan buildings, there's kind of a frieze at the top or a cornice element that's decorative. In other words, that's where the kind of decorative signifiers are taking place, whatever it is that's being communicated. And a kind of reduced abstraction of that, when you go around the buildings here at Taliesin West and you look at how walls meet roofs, each one is a different condition. There's a whole multitude of them, and we don't have the condition of a roof plane overhanging the wall, which,
wow.
When we look at these Mayan structures in Mexico, they may have had that, but we don't see it now because that would have been wood and it's all gone. So that's sort of how we understand those buildings now, is sort of as no overhanging roof. And so that means it's just a curious similarity I've noticed.
Interesting. Arthur is saying, other than Japanese and Italian architectural influences, was Wright ever interested in classic Islamic architecture? Alhambra, some of the great mosques. Oh.
Well, again, I don't know. What I can say is that in his autobiography, he references a book called The Grammar of Ornament by Owen, can't remember the last name. And this is a very thick book, and it's essentially just lots of illustrations of decorative elements, for the most part, two-dimensional ones from around the world. And it definitely contains Islamic kind of decorative elements. And there is in his copy of the book, he wrote over one of those patterns and he altered it slightly. It's just a kind of repeating pattern. And that pattern with the alteration is in the art glass windows of the home and studio in his in Oak Park. So yes, he is clearly studying from that. He's kind of paying attention to these primarily graphic patterns and cribbing off them. But I mean, that's one of a very few number of clear references that we can sort of track. There's the what? Oh, that's right. Yeah. So later on, he was commissioned to do designs in Iran and Baghdad.
Yeah.
And this commissions that those didn't get built, but then later on, Taliesin architects, after Wright passed, did go to Iran and these were built.
Interesting.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Thanks, Jeff.
I think our time is almost up. Let's see, Diana is saying, congratulations on the UNESCO designation. Serial designations are difficult to achieve. And I also know they're difficult to keep because you're supposed to produce a management plan. I mean, it's a big, big deal for any architectural site anywhere in the world. So really incredible job. I think our time is almost up, mostly because Jeff has to open a museum to public, and we have to leave the beautiful living room to other people to enjoy. Are there any final questions or comments? If you want to come in, please do. And thank you so much for tuning in. I want to thank Jeff. Jeff, would you come in here, please, so we can all kind of say goodbye? And then also my sister Ina, and I'm really grateful to Ina for introducing me to you.
Yes.
And can I say the connection to the Argentinian world as well that
Yes.
we share?
I met Inya through tango, as a teacher and then as a friend.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so thanks to, the passions of any kind of artistic passion, I think our worlds always, expand in such a beautiful ways. So you're a tango dancer, and I'm so glad. So thank you, Ina, for this introduction and doing everything behind the scenes. And then thank you, Jeff. You're also an actor, right? You had this incredible career before you became this incredible professional. You were on the stage.
I was, yes.
Yes, and I think it helps also when you work with people, right? I think that help in your job.
Well, I really think of, marketing. I think of it as storytelling. And so,
True.
my experience on the stage really helps me to understand communicating with an audience and telling a story in the way that is most accessible to them.
Yes.
And challenging.
Yes, yes. You did an incredible job here. Good luck with everything. I hope you will have some new supporters coming in now.
Yes,
after
look forward
this,
to that.
Or at least people who can follow you on social media. And I will share all of those links at the end when I send the recording. Thank you everyone for tuning in. It was really a pleasure to share this beautiful morning hour here in Scottsdale Desert with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you, Paola.
And,
Thank you. Mahalo.
Bye-bye.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was
Take care.
fabulous.
Thank you. Arrivederci, everyone.
Arrivederci, ciao.
Okay, thank